came into being and the situation of biodiversity conservation in Uganda. We came into being as Uganda Biodiversity Trust Fund in August 2016. That is because conservationists realized that biodiversity conservation had a financial gap. Government came in to finance biodiversity conservation. Development partners have also come in to finance biodiversity conservation, but still there was a financial gap to ensure that everything is well conserved. So the development partners, government agencies, NGOs and CBOs came together to think through the situation at that time, saying what is it that could be done to ensure that biodiversity is conserved sustainably for this nation. So the idea that came up was to establish an indigenous, a Ugandan conservation trust fund that covers conservation all over the nation. So Uganda Biodiversity Trust Fund was established then with funding from USAID. The mission of the organization is to mobilize funds for conservation of biodiversity, to ensure that biodiversity is flourishing and that it is for the benefit of the people of Uganda. As we look ahead, we see a flourishing biodiversity, we see people benefiting from it. So our mandate is to ensure that we bring together money from different sources and give it out to various agencies to ensure that biodiversity is conserved. We aim at working with local communities, working with national NGOs, working with international NGOs, and anybody else, private sector, individuals, academic institutions, all those who have a heart for conserving biodiversity. So as an organization, we have about 3 or 4 objectives. Apart from gathering funds to finance, we also ensure that we bring in partners, identifying who are the partners that we are going to work with, establishing contact with the private sector, establish contact with the government agencies, for local communities who live and interact with biodiversity on a day-to-day, on a daily basis. So we have developed programs rooted within our strategic plan. We have gone through the strategic planning process for the year 2022 for 5 years. We did a review of our previous strategic plan, and then basing on that platform, on the key lessons that have been learned, we developed a strategic plan for 5 years from 2022. Within that strategic plan, we have 4 pillars. The first pillar is on financial resource mobilization and management, and within that we aim to mobilize resources to address the financial gap in biodiversity conservation in Uganda. We also look at maximizing investments. We don't just go about seeking funds from different agencies, from development partners, but we are looking at the aspect of sustainability. As an agency, what is it that we can do to ensure that in perpetuity there will be funding available for biodiversity conservation? And we also aim to enhance effectiveness of availing funds to impact biodiversity conservation. So we have developed systems and programs to ensure that the funds that we get from different partners can be invested for returns. And then also those returns that we get can be invested with different communities and agencies to ensure that forests are conserved, wetlands are conserved, chimpanzees, butterflies, even soil organisms that we normally do not talk about are conserved. Another aspect is on institutional strengthening, one of our objectives. The second objective is institutional strengthening. As a conservation trust fund in Uganda, we need to be able to operate sustainably. So we are putting in place mechanisms to ensure that the institution, Uganda Biodiversity Trust Fund, is strengthened. It has enough resources, both human and financial. In institutional strengthening, we are looking at the governance structures within the organization. What kind of capacity do we require in terms of governance? Do we have the necessary skills for conservation, for financial management, for governance? And then also the systems and processes that are required to ensure that the institution is running profitably and is managed like a business. We also aim to build a case for biodiversity conservation and climate change. As we go on implementing our programs, we have discovered that not so many people understand what biodiversity conservation is all about. Not many people understand what climate change is all about, what the effects of climate change on biodiversity conservation is. So we aim to increase public awareness and stakeholder engagement in biodiversity conservation, linking biodiversity conservation, economic development, livelihoods, and all sectors together to ensure that we all work together towards conserving biodiversity. And so that takes us to our fourth objective, which is on partnership and collaboration. We aim to foster partnership development because as a CTF, a conservation trust fund, we are not able to do everything to conserve biodiversity on our own. So we need to work together with government agencies, we need to work together with the private sector, to international NGOs, local CBOs, and the communities themselves, because the communities are the ones who live and interact with biodiversity on a daily. They are the ones who engage with the chimpanzees. They are the ones who have to protect themselves against the lions hunting the livestock. They are the ones who interact on a day-to-day basis. So we saw the importance of working with CBOs and on working with the communities themselves. So over the years, we have done a number of activities. We have engaged with several CBOs and NGOs and developed projects. Our priority areas are in the Albertine Rift. We have funded projects in the Albertine Rift. We have funded projects in northern Uganda. We have funded projects in Karamoja, and we are also interested in the Sangobe area. Those are the 4 key geographical areas that we are interested in. And we have funded 11 projects over the years, starting in 2018, where we funded a program on human-wildlife conflict in Kasungoye. That was a key major achievement for us because we were like a baby who is beginning to take baby steps, and we were trying out our systems and how to go about doing the granting. The Kasungoye Project is a success story, let me say it like that, because we developed together with JGI and EcoTrust, we developed a program that gave a seed fund to establish what we called a resilience fund to help the communities to put in place systems that would enable them to fund their lives, to get funding for whatever they needed for daily living without depending on the forest and without having to hunt out the chimpanzees, without having to fight with the chimpanzees, without having to be in conflict with biodiversity. So some money was given to them, and groups of people came together, the communities came together and formed what now we call VSLA, the Village Savings and Loan Association, but at that time we called it a resilience fund. because we aim to give the communities resilience to be able to live together in harmony with biodiversity. We went there 2 years ago to check on them, and they have progressed well beyond what we gave them as seed fund. They have multiplied it around 100% by now. So we are taking that pilot that we did, we took it and have utilized the same strategy in different areas in the Albertine Rift. We have also started the same strategy in the Karamoja region. We look at two different areas. We look at biodiversity conservation, and we also look at supporting community livelihoods. Why do we do that? We have noticed over time that in our programming as a nation, we tend to separate the two. We talk about biodiversity conservation, and then we talk about community livelihoods. But these two are closely interlinked, because you find that in the villages, the communities go to the forest to get firewood. They go to the forest to burn charcoal in order to earn income. They go to the forest to get medicinal plants. They go to the forest to hunt rats, or to the woodlands, edible rats, to hunt rats or whatever it is they need for their upkeep and for earning money. So if we separate those two and say we are conserving biodiversity here, and then we are looking at community livelihoods on the other hand, we are going the wrong way, because the two have to go hand in hand. That's why we decided as UBF to ensure that the programs that we develop, the projects that we fund, have both pillars within them. So that as we look at restoring forests, as we look at sustainable land management, as we look at how to restore and protect the wetlands, we are also looking at how will those communities survive who depend on the wetlands, who depend on the forests, who depend on biodiversity to ensure their livelihood. So we are funding projects that ensure that the communities can earn a living without destroying that from which they are earning a living. If we want money for school fees, if we want money to pay for food, if we want money for clothing, how are we going to get it as a community without destroying the forest on which we depend, cutting down all the trees to get timber for sale, to get pole to burn charcoal so as to earn money? So we are introducing different alternatives to the communities to ensure that their livelihoods are catered for. How are we doing that? We are looking at woodlots, for example, establishing woodlots with quick growing species, so that instead of going to the forest to cut poles, instead of going to the forest to burn charcoal, instead of going to the forest to cut timber, why don't I, as a household, as a family, establish my half an acre of woodlot, quick growing, so that in a year or two I'm able to get firewood, in 3 years or 4 I'm able to get polewood, in 5 years or 6 I'm able to get timber. That is sustainable. Instead of cutting from the forest, I establish for my own. And then once we get the communities to establish that kind of system, we are comfortable that as time goes on, as the communities go from destroying the environment on which they depend to conserving it and sustaining it for their livelihoods, then biodiversity will be conserved in Uganda. Over the years, we have made several achievements. We have given out grants to a tune of 2.2 billion Uganda shillings. We have done that since 2018 up to now. We have current projects that are ongoing. We have done community awareness programs. We have done training in tree nursery establishment, in woodlot establishment, in apiary development, working not only directly with the CBOs, but working with international NGOs, working with donor agencies to ensure that that is done. We have participated in restoration of Central Forest Reserves. We have done some work in Budongo Central Forest Reserve. We have done some work in Bugoma Central Forest Reserve. We are working in West Nile under funding from European Union, where we are working with farmers to ensure restoration of woodlands, restoration of forests, development of sustainable land management practices, and climate smart agriculture. We have started village savings and loans associations in several districts in the Albertine Rift and in Karamoja. We have also gone into working with women groups and youths in tackling the energy crisis, where we are supporting development of alternative clean energy and energy saving technologies. Here we have trained youths to be the ones to construct the energy saving stoves as an income generating activity. We have trained women groups to make the briquettes that are used in the energy saving stoves as an income generating activity as well, and linked them to schools and institutions, so that as the women develop make the briquettes, there is already a market established in schools and hospitals and institutions, so that we have a clear market linkage. What type of challenges have we come across? Still, the financing gap for biodiversity conservation is still so wide. We have come in to fill part of that gap, but it's like we are still like a drop in the ocean. The ocean is still so wide, and we still need more funds to be able to come in and meet the financing gap. That's why we are in the process of establishing an endowment fund to ensure that there is sustainability. Another challenge we have encountered is the attitude towards conservation. There are good policies at the national level. There are good strategies that have been discussed. There is a lot of talk about environmental conservation and biodiversity conservation. But when you go down to the ground, you do not find that the talk that is at the top has trickled to the ground. The attitude towards conservation is still not so good. We are still looking at development against conservation. As we develop those roads and pass through wetlands, as we construct our personal houses, as we do all sorts of things for development, we find that we are still doing things that are destroying biodiversity. Another thing is to get the private sector on board. We have found that in trying to partner with the private sector, yes, as a private sector, their bottom line is to get money. But we need them to start thinking, where are the resources that we are using coming from? Where is the waste that is coming out of our process going to? How do we tackle the pollution? How do we tackle the plastics that are destroying biodiversity? We need the private sector to start asking themselves those kinds of questions. It's not just about the bottom line, but it's about the other impacts that we have on biodiversity. So what is the way forward for us? We need to think long term. We need to plan long term. We need to come together as different agencies, institutions, people that are interested in not only our future, but interested in the future of our children and our children's children. What are we doing to ensure that our children will have a good life? We need to think that way and ensure that whatever we are programming, whatever we are developing is for sustainability of biodiversity, on which our lives depend. So that is why we are making a call to all the partners and all the stakeholders and all interested parties. Even if you're not interested, you should be interested, So we are calling upon you to ensure that whatever you do, whatever programs you're developing, whatever activities you are doing, they are all for the sustainability and the good of this nation. We would like to thank our partners. We would like to thank UBC for the good work that you're doing, especially in focus.